Hello, everyone. Welcome to another hopefully exciting installment of Esoterics Today. I am your co-host, Amber Chamberlain, the Suburban Lightworker, and I have with me the fantastic, as always, Satara Jules Lightbringer. We are going to get into what will become a bit of a series for a while relative to the timeline beginning with Mara. And we're going to talk about that origination story from our perspective that will take you through a journey of the expressions that our planetary system and specific planet here has taken over time. And we will describe that a little bit better in not so linear terms. But welcoming you, Satara, and wondering if you can talk about why we're going to get into sort of the origination story beginning with Mara. Why is this a good time to do that?
Well, I think it's a good time at the moment because it's like we've gone through so much upheaval, especially this last 12 months. It seems like a week is like a year at the moment with the amount that we can cram into that time. There's some very interesting time slips that are going on, which kind of remind me a bit of like when the planet was originally put together and birthed in a way, while it was all being synced into a particular shape, pattern, form, however you want to kind of look at it. And the way that the programming was created here to be able to encompass all densities.
Well, so, yeah. Finish your thought.
No, I was just thinking, from that sort of point of view, we live here. We don't think of the complexity of the nature of what we have. And I think it's a good time to kind of remind people of this, as we start to unravel more and more this year. The amount of timelines that have kind of come and gone have been incredible. So I thought, Leah, why don't we kind of look at the origins of the planet that we live on, well, even the solar system that we live within.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I think we are, if you've been listening to our show for a while or probably picking these other things up on your own over time, you have a good sense, those of you who listen to this show have a really good sense that we are on a cycle. Everything is on a cycle in creation. Everything that is organic has a life cycle, has an existence cycle. And where we are, you're going to hear this spoken about, although maybe Satara wouldn't say it quite like this, and I don't quite talk about it like this all the time, but you'll hear it commonly referred to as an ascension cycle. Because there is some sort of construct of evolutionary cycling, and there is a 25,000 year agreed cyclical story that we can kind of hang our storyline onto a bit. And we've definitely rounded into that, I would say, last maybe 10% of that cycle this time and I've mentioned this in the past, that we also can refer to this as a yuga, Y-U-G-A. And when we see ourselves rounding into this segment is when we're going to see what Satara just mentioned, sort of this timeline merging and what you would call a convergence. Some are referring to this more mechanically as a 0 point. And when we have a 0 point in creation energies, you have an awful lot of anomalous behavior that Satara is referring to in timelines and in expression and in energetic happenings. So I think this is a good time from that perspective. I'm glad you put it that way. What I'm referring to here, we're going to, and I'm going to back up a little bit to describe this series even further before I turn our attention to our incredibly knowledgeable and experienced storyteller with Satara here. We're going to start today really with Mara, but where we're headed is into what is Tara, what is Lemuria, Mu, or Pangaea. We'll talk about Atlantis and Gaia, or Gaia. We're going to talk about the moon. You're going to hear us referencing Tiamat and Marduk. And we certainly are not going to, and we may dip into the Sumeria Babylonian ripples, as Satara would describe them. And we are certainly going to be referencing Ra, so our sun, that life bringer perspective, which I think is going to show up today as we talk about Mara. And you're going to hear us talking about the first volunteers, particularly around Atlantis and the 6th and 7th density. You're going to hear us talk about the moon from its organic to its inorganic change-ups that have occurred. So there is an enormous amount of content that's going to come across this series over the next number of months. And it'll be interesting to see where that takes us. We are going to continue to have guests come that will sort of break up in between some of the months. So be looking for that. As a matter of fact, I think we've got a guest coming soon who's going to be addressing, Satara, addressing Sasquatch. Thank you. I was trying to think of the other name.
Yeti.
I was tapping at me to use Yeti. So we are going to, we're going to see that guest come about shortly too, in some of our next, as the next month or two go by. So to get this part of the show started, Satara, begin with where you'd like to begin relative to Mara, and I think it's going to also involve Ra. And let's really describe both of these conceptualizations, these beings, because what we should all understand is planetary systems and expressions are literally beings with a full teeming with life and teeming with creation capability and expression. So let's begin at the beginning. So where should we go, Satara?
We are going to go across to the other side of the universe. We're going to start off in the quadrant that is dominated by Andromeda and all of Andromeda's planets, stars, moons, everything. There was a war. It was much later than the Lyran Wars, which most people will know about. It was also later than the Orion Wars, which most know about. It was a very interesting time when the closest we kind of have here is nuclear warheads, were threatened against a fairly peaceful planet because they would not give up their planet and move on. A lot of planets across the universe are very rich in quite rare minerals. Some beings forget that you can manipulate matter to be able to create more and replicate, which is used in a lot of the hydroponics aspects of things across ships, crafts, realities. But at that time, for whatever reason, these beings decided that they wanted the resources from this planet Mara was made from a fantastic form of glass. The closest we have to it would be obsidian here. So if you think of like this beautiful, rich, deep cerulean blue glass, this is basically the basis of this planet. This glass was deemed to be high energetic. It was used similar to how we would use mica for microchips. It was more evolved than that, but that's probably the best explanation I can give you with something that we have here so simply. Yes?
So, Tara, can you name the planet that was pretty peaceful, and could you name that planet?
That was Mara.
That was Mara.
Mara.
Okay, and then can you name the threat? Who was making or what? Who was interfering with Mara at that time?
Yes, I can. I'm just having to write it phonetically because it's not, yeah. Tieth Tramea were the beings that decided that they wanted whatever they could mine out of this planet to the very last inf that they could get hold of. Mara's collective basically said, no, move on. We will give you samples for you to replicate. That's as good as you're going to get. They didn't want to do that because they could see the mass of this planet and they were greedy, basically. So they threatened the Marans with war. And the Marans said, we're not having a bar of it. We've offered you what you want. We'll give you perfect sample. Be on your way.
What sector were these intruders from and these greedy beings from?
They actually came through from a parallel that had already created and destroyed a similar planet. So basically they said, right, that's absolutely fine. We're going to take it anywhere way and fired on nuclear straight on to Mara without the perhaps ability or foresight to think how that would perhaps work. The way an explosion works, it goes to the center to go out when an explosion implodes. The size of the planet was large enough to create one hell of a ripple. If you think the way that our universe is shaped is like the figure 8 on its side, the shock of that implosion basically allowed that planet to travel. And it traveled from one end of the figure 8 to the other end of the figure 8. So it literally disappeared in its entirety from where it had been and appeared in a different part of the universe, literally the other end of the universe.
Did it stay in terms of its, did it stay in its density?
Yes, but no. So because of the way it exploded, it literally, parts of it are smaller than a grain of sand. That is how vast the explosion was. So if you imagine all sorts of fantastic debris in this wonderful, like, sparkly blue, because it's not pretty, it's just not in its true form. This created what we think of here as our Milky Way. So you've got an idea of the vastness of how much of this planet there was, because our Milky Way is huge. So the creator beings watch this because they tend not to interfere. They're very much watchers of what are happening, and they watch this disappear from one end and go to the other. So that was the end of the story from the Andromeda sector, because the beings that wanted this stuff could no longer get it anyhow, because they didn't know where it had gone. So everything that they'd, which is quite ironic, so everything that they kind of hoped for had just been taken away from them anyhow. But repercussions went on because of the devastation. To kill a planet is the worst crime you can commit in any universe.
Wow.
Because it is not just down to the planet, it's everything that is made up of, everything that exists within it, everything that exists because of it. Because a planet is not just a standalone thing, it has to be part of a system. So if you think of us here, we have to be part of the solar system. If any one item goes out of the solar system, everything goes out of sync. Nothing works anymore. And it's designed particularly to be like that as an extra layer of protection because of, shall we call them, idiots blowing up things like Mara in the past.
So you mentioned about, there's several things for me to kind of back up for our listeners a bit on. First of all, position again why Andromeda comes up in this part of the conversation.
Predominantly because it was in the very outer segments of what we think of the Andromeda sector that this planet was in.
So it was on the sort of the outer limit. Mara was sort of on the outer edges of the Andromeda system.
Yeah, very much so. It was classed in the Andromeda sector, but it was literally on the edge.
Okay. And by the way, our Earth today, would you correct me in my perception? Because I wonder about the placement of our Earth today. Isn't it on sort of the edges of the solar system?
Very much so. So if you think when it bounced from the edge, that side, it arrived at the edge, this side.
Very interesting. That's going to be very important to the conversation, I guess.
It will.
Okay.
And as well as realizing that the universe isn't a round thing and that it is this figure eight.
Yes.
So that everything is mirroring each other within the figure eight.
Yeah.
It was very interesting that one thing went from one side to the other in this way.
So I want to go back also to, thank you for that. I want to go back also to explosion and the impact, particularly when we're talking about nuclear energetic, which is what we're talking about, explosions, which also occurred certainly in the Lyran and in the Orion war times. When we have that, would I be correct in saying that there are tears, holes in the space-time continuum that create then, would these be what we refer to as black holes?
Not particularly. Black holes are usually what we perceive as gaps, but they all have some sort of magnetic pull. So the magnetic pull on a black hole isn't a vortex, but it is actually the magnetic pull of a planet that is within that space. We perceive them as black holes because we cannot see these planets, because the vibration that they are at and what our spectrum that we can see at are so far apart, we can't quantify them.
So we can't, okay, so that would be more the official viewpoint of a black hole and its energetics and why we because our technology is needlessly limited today. We get that. It's actually not limited anywhere else except in this dimensional problem we have, third going to fourth dimension. But okay, so but with the tears in space time continuum, Am I to understand too that when when there's this kind of tearing and kind of putting holes in the magnetosphere, so to speak, does that then open us, because isn't that a protective
Well,
layer?
it keeps each universe separate from a point of view of keeping all the energetics together for each one, the thought being that each one would have a slightly different energetic anyhow. So the fact that that if you imagine things listed from an A to Z, that an A all the way through to Z were going to be universes, they would all have a slightly different harmonic from the first to the last, but they would be harmonious next to each other. But like you start to put, say, A with G, and you're going to be in trouble because that's not going to mix. So the mix slightly alters all the way through.
So therein can be the point of entry for inorganic opportunity too, that we'll talk about as these conversations go by, as we get past this sort of timeline discussion we're going to be having for this series.
Very much so. If people think of them as just doorways have opened.
Yeah, that's
doorways of probability.
Doorways of probability. Okay. So going back then, now we have Mara, essentially this beautiful blue glassine body that has been cast by nuclear involvement to another place, so to speak, in the space-time continuum. Mm-hmm. It is now in this other sector. So what then begins to happen for Mara?
From a point of view of Mara, it was looked to see if anything was salvageable. Because again, we've already talked about the replication. Samples of this, if it was needed in any other way, we have the perfect like harvesting, because it's like one tiny piece, like a grain of sand, would be able to grow whatever you wanted to grow using hydroponics. So you are then able to make it 1,000-fold within a day, to give people a bit of an idea of how hydroponics can work, and it can go far quicker than that, but that will at least give some sort of context for people. There was a particularly large piece of Mara, which was the heart of Mara, that was still fairly undamaged. The very nature of it being slightly different density, more difficult to destroy. So creators looked at this and thought, if we don't do something with it, that will die. If that dies, something else will have to die, because we have to create the balance. So rather than letting that happen, the concept was brought together to create our planet. Now, of course, our planet has to exist in a solar system, so the whole solar system had to be created for it all to be working nicely. So this turned into a bit of a job, shall we say.
Before you go on, there was one thing I wanted to ask about. Well, there's two. One is, we know that, we know in the law of one, so to speak, and in the cosmic laws, that when laws are broken in such that we had this kind of behavior that created this issue in the first place, could you describe for our listeners what became of these individuals and this intrusion that created this dynamic? What became of them and who dealt with them? Because this is very important. I think humans, we are used to, on the third dimension, understanding crime and punishment, so to speak. So if you could talk about the balancing of the laws from a cosmic standpoint before we go on to the next phase of Mara.
Of course. They were actually dealt with by the creator aspects. sometimes called the architects, because they basically wreck some of the architecture with the said doors, etc. Now, we think here as humans that death's a punishment. It's not a punishment anywhere else, because you're aware that as soon as you die, you just walk into your next skin suit and off you go again. So that is a pointless punishment in any other density, because you just think, great, lovely, I'll carry on. Yeah, same day, carry on running. So that isn't quite what they were coming from. What they had realized, of course, the architects, because if you think each universe has its own architect set, which is then overseen by greater architects that see bigger and bigger pictures. So the same as everything works here, you've got like your different lines of like hierarchy within it. So obviously they knew that not only had these beings upset our universe, they'd upset the one next to it. So there's two lots of architects that want to know what they're playing at, because this isn't what's done. Because you've got if you can imagine energy going from our universe is starting to flow into the next one, their energy starting to flow into this one, it's causing a bit of a nightmare. So it had to be disentangled, moved, sealed. So it was decided that the best thing that could happen to these beings, that they would actually be put into the void. Now, the void is a very useful place from a point of view of you can quite happily sit there for a few thousand years to observe. You don't have to be part of it. You don't have to be energetically engaged with it. But yeah, it lets you see the bigger picture. So rather than punish per se, they were given the full window to watch repercussions, to have a level of understanding that what they caused. Once that is fully grasped in all of its facets, they're allowed back into the reincarnation cycle. So yeah, definition of punishment. I think it's brilliant punishment, because I just think, yeah, that's great. Can I have a cushion? Lovely. I'll just sit here a bit and watch. But the fact that you're then bringing people to a point of view of understanding rather than a point of view of suffering.
I really appreciated that description, because what I want our listeners to understand is this is actually by the law of the omniverse, that law of one and the inherencies with that is the methodology that occurs. We will watch. Now, there are, in some instances, in my understanding, some, if it's a soul embodiment, that then there can be just a reabsorption of that. And that's to the void again. Really what you're describing is to the void you go. And again, as you say, it's not a bad place to go. It's not bad nor good. Remember, Im and Om, it's none of the things that we're going to talk about today are bad nor good. They are the happenings of the balancing act that go on. Everybody's got a role to play in any kind of thought form or structure or energetic. Everybody has, it's all a role to play. So thank you for describing that, because I think people, our legalistic brains, because of the human brain and the way we think, and then of course the programming on this planet and our dimension, cause us to be rather blocky, rather black and white about these things. We don't like, we want bad actors punished, historically on this planet, in this dimension. And so what we understand is that's not punishment per se, it is a change in the alchemical representation, which is what happens to us at death, which is why dropping as Satara lovingly calls them, skin suits, which is why dropping the body is really not that big of a deal. But anyway, that's another conversation. All right, so bring us, my friend, to Mara now.
They'll bring us back tomorrow. So obviously that's all happening, and it's like, you know, the riffs and everything are mended, everything's put back to as it was in the click of a finger with the, look, this is what you've done, watch it, learn, enjoy. End of thought process for these beings, because it's like the education system will put them back in with knowing better than that, having a different take on what they're going to do next. So yes, so Mara, the heart is protected, and organic structures are started to weave around it as different layers of protection. The decision is made that the best thing that can happen is that this is going to be a planet again. For this planet to survive, it needs XYZ planets around it. The name was still kept, and I'll touch briefly on the name, because the name Mara is bringing in the Ra energy. Now, the Ra energy is basically life force. End of thought process. So anything that has a Ra in its name talks about the giver of life, the giving of life. So the very nature of keeping that name had, in a way, given the destiny for the planet. It was going to be able to sustain life on any and all levels. So the planet was gradually kind of, framework was put together, and the call went out for volunteers for across the whole of our universe to come and help and bring life to it. So the first sort of life that would come forward would be what we would think of as like molten rock, different rocks, crystals, to actually start to bring that substance to the planet. There's always a layer of molten rock around the heart of a planet.
Mm.
And this is because if idiots decide to try and blow it up, like we know they do now, the chances of anything getting through that molten lava is very remote. If you think of how dense it is, how hot it is, anything that is going to touch it is going to be burnt to annihilation to get through it. So it really is a protection for the heart of the planet.
Okay, before we go on, there's a couple of questions about this, because you've sparked up two things for me. Number one, and see, I'm participating as on the show with you, but I feel like I'm participating as a listener to the show, right? Mm-hmm. So number one is, why do we have to have other planets around us in order for our own planet to be healthy and well?
It's again all about different harmonics. If you look at our solar system, you look at the size of some of the planets we have around us, we all spin around each other. Yeah, fair to say. Anybody that's ever looked at anything to do with how this planet and the solar system moves will see that we spin. But all of us spin pretty much at different rates, but we are going in the same direction at the same time. And it's all about protection. And it's all about the different energies working with each other to create the whole.
Sort of like the pulley and fulcrum of our physics today, the basics of physics.
Yeah.
Got it. Okay, so my next question is, but I think these are the things I think that would, as you would say, rock up for people in there as they're listening to this beautiful story. So another thing that popped up for me is, now we're talking about the chakra system of the planet, because what you described, because everything has every form, and correct me if I'm saying this wrong or I'm off the beat, Satara, but because of the tree of life and the spheres, I would say this 12 spheres of the tree of life, that every form kind of has its energetic body, and it has a chakra system I feel like I'm leaving some things out, but I'm getting to the point that you're referring to the heart of the planet and that
Mm.
molten rock that's the protective layer, because the heart chakra, that's what you're referring to, of Mara, has to be, cared for, just like in the human being.
Yeah.
Our heart chakra, our high heart, our heart is sort of the center point for the creation energies and the soul embodiment there.
Yeah.
Sort
So
of.
as well as if you think like the physical heart that we have, if we did not have that to pump the blood around and the lipids, we could not exist.
So this is Mara's story too, and why into a planet that becomes the molten rock becomes such an important feature, a living feature. And by the way, it's reminding everyone about the mineral, the rock and mineral realm, and
Mm-hmm.
how fundamental it is to nourishing and protecting.
Yeah, very, very
How
much.
alive it is.
Because it's like we think of rock as being hard, and we would think that if something was surrounded by rock, it would be protected.
Right.
But actually, with a big enough blast, rock turns to dust.
Pretty quickly.
Very, very quickly.
Would you,
because we needed bulk.
Yes. Before we go even now further into this next piece of Mara, could you, how does the chakra story, the energy body story, relate to now the formation of the newly put together Mara?
At this point, because she's still kind of, we're asking for volunteers to come and bring flora and fauna along. We're asking for like the rock samples to do that. We're asking for the crystal samples to do that. We're asking for this planet to be bulked out, but with as much beauty and diversity that we can find throughout the whole of the universe. Because it had been decided when it was not only were we going to save the heart to allow the heart then to have a body, that's when the decision was made to actually decide that all densities would be here, all realities could be here. This was going to be a totally different take to what had already been put forward when the universe was created. So this is the architects moving to a different level.
Oh, so it was decided that Mara in this newest expression was going to give the architects a fresh take on the building of a planet in a planetary system.
Yeah, very
Here
much.
begins the story about why you'll hear Earth referred to as the jewel.
Yeah, or the great experiment.
Or the great experiment. Oh, now it's really getting good. Not like it wasn't good before. Now we're getting into it, Sitara. So take us from here.
So that sort of gives a snapshot into what's kind of going on as this planet is evolving. Now, this isn't happening quickly, because as one set of energetics come in, it has to be balanced by another to be able to give balance here. So it isn't just like, oh, great, we've got a load of like, I don't know, red jasper, let's give them some of that. It's not that simple, yeah? So the biodiversity had to be balanced. So you have what we called reality weavers, which aren't really archetypes, but they're not far off. Reality weavers are 10th density beings who help to create balance from a planetary point of view. So if you can imagine, if you had a whole room of people that had all got their own individual like agenda going on, and the rows that can go on between them to get their own agenda fixed first, planets do the same thing. So you have to get that kind of balance going within each planet. So within a solar system, that kind of happens with these weavers, because they have to keep everything balanced. So if for some reason Pluto was getting really, really upset at Mars because some of the resources weren't coming back that had been promised, this is when the balance has to be done, because planets are going, nah, I'm bigger than you, sod you, I'm keeping it. Yeah? And the other will be like, hold on a minute, we can't afford to really give you that, but we did it as a favor. Don't start that with me. And of course, they will start rowing. But if you just think of it in such an easy way, yeah, it's the same as humans do, but they're just a bigger version of us with the same complexities and the same stuff going on, but on a bigger scale. So you have the reality weavers that will help to keep it all harmonious. So if they can see one planet is about to blow itself up because it is going to explode at the other one because it's had enough, they're the ones that like, hold on a minute, we can calm this down. We can calm it down energetically while we work out what the problem is on a different level to be able to get it sorted. So they will be very diplomatic with sorting stuff out. So this is kind of what's going on here, which is just beautiful, really, because I can't explain the amount of beings that said, can we come and have a look? You know, can we see what's happening here? Because the whole universe at that time would have known about the explosion. It's not like now where we don't even know what's going on the moon. Yeah, everything was connected, everything was linked, everybody knew what was going on. So of course this was a big thing, that something new was happening, that people wanted to, and I say people loosely, that people wanted to witness, to learn from, to go, okay, this is a whole new thing that's happening here, this is exciting, we can all be part of this, let's see how it can evolve. But not only can we see how that can evolve, but how we can evolve where we are, because we've watched this and understood it. So it was like a huge learning thing that was going on here. Whilst they're balking Mara out, they're asking for fragments from other things. It's like, we need a sun over here. Can we have a bit? We'll replicate it. We only need a bit. We'll give it you back. We just need to replicate it. So therefore, we've got the sun. It's like, we need a moon now. We can't have the hot without the cold. Need a moon. Yeah. So again, oh yeah, lovely, thanks. Replicate it. Thank you. Gone back. And this is how it continued evolving throughout all of the solar system until we've got this beautiful, like, spiraling movement begins. And as the spiraling movement begins, that then lets us know if the density patterns are right. Because there can be wobble. There can be some moving too quick, some moving too slow, some not moving, some gone. Yeah, to be able to get that program done. So there's calculations that are done, and then it's made sure that the calculations will perpetuate into infinity on the thread that they will move to. So yeah, quite little complex little thing, but that was really where Mara, you know, came from. At this point, we're still not talking any civilizations being here, because it's still very much in the birthing stage. So imagine the heart would have been the very beginning of life starting, and then quietly the cells come together to create the body, just that the body is the planet that we are upon.
In terms of human conceptualization of time, can you place any of that in the human conceptualization of time? I almost think it's very difficult to do that.
Yeah, I'm just like, the figure that I've just got was 87 billion years.
Yeah.
From the initial, this is what we're going to do, to it actually being complete. And I don't just mean us, I mean the solar system being complete. Because if you think it all has to be part of the whole, even if we see it as separate.
Wow. And yet I know in no time that's no time. I mean, it's literally just being done, as a matter of fact, and on somebody's project list, so to speak, because there's
Yeah.
probably a master project manager.
Yeah. Going, that doesn't quite line up to where I got it. It needs to be 2 millimeters left.
Right, right. But our perception, 80 plus billion years later, we have this full expression of Mara. Is there something else before we kind of move to staging for the next show that
Yeah.
you would like to talk about where we get to with Mara now?
Yeah, I think from a point of view, it makes sense that when the actual body is being made, the ecosystem was then put in place to be able to hold and sustain anything that was put on the planet. So if we think of the planet's been built, everything's been put down, the last thing that's put here is water, because of the very nature of, it's like, okay, we've got the framework done, let's get the water down there, let's put it in a biosphere so the water doesn't leave. So it's like locked in. And then the next thought process is the green things to grow on top of it. So then you're starting to talk about the actual richness there of plant life. So when the plant life was then put in, that is when the call went out to, we want some volunteers to be here. You do not need to be in a physical density here, but we need it experienced so that if we've missed anything or other diversities can be brought in, we need somebody on the ground. That is when what we would think of Lemuria began.
Oh, how interesting. Because I was just going to ask you, what came to mind is mushrooms.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
Did mushrooms come early?
They did. Mushrooms on a lot of planets are the main staple of food.
Oh.
Because most beings wouldn't eat anything dense, knowing that what is put in is altering their vibration. So therefore, light foods are used, and mushrooms are quite a light food.
Oh, they're probably on my top 5 food. So mushrooms. But when we talk about the seeding, we're talking about people. Then, from those of you from the biologics and the basics of ecosystem, we're talking about molds. We're talking about fungi. We're talking, like the mushroom is fungi. We're talking about what just. I wouldn't guess it's that single-celled, but very few cell plant life.
Yeah, you're talking like paramecium level, aren't you?
I was going to say paramecium level life. And when do ferns come in? Because I know ferns are very early.
They were very, very much so. The nature of them being able to grow on little soil as well. And to be able to add, because this biosphere that's being created is allowing things like ferns to breathe. Because this is what we forget, plants breathe.
They are the lungs
breathe.
Of the planet.
Yeah, very, very much so. So this is what was put in first to make sure that the environment was going to be balanced. And for non-physical beings to come in that would still need to breathe to a certain degree to be able to balance that further should it need to be.
So I'm going to hold us at this concept that we've arrived to Mara's ecosystem, and which will edge us towards Lemuria as we get to the next show. I think at this time, we've done a lot in this time together, Satora, to introduce where we're headed, why we're headed there in these discussions, and beginning with the cataclysm that happened to Mara in another place in space-time continuum, and how she ended up where we find ourselves today as Gaia, the planet Earth. So I think I think what a beautiful story we've begun.
Very much so. You know, it was an incredible time to witness.
Incredible time. Now, the last thing I want to mention before we sign off this episode is making it more personal to you and me, because I think our listeners appreciate when we bring it to our living and being today and who we are and what we're doing here, and to you and me too, Satara. So could you describe in your awareness, because I don't have awareness of my contribution at those times as an infinite being, you came in with this level of gnosis that you have maintained. Can you describe for our listeners where you were and what your body of work was at that time? And I use the word time loosely.
I'm glad you used time loosely. I was very much one of the observer architects at the time, which is why I know what happened to the perpetrators of this, and why I know about the decisions to actually make it. I'm very aware of, I can see the plans now that were created for this universe, to work out what we needed, how many, what would be the best way of doing this, how we could balance it.
Okay, and what you're listening to as listeners now, you're understanding yourselves in the mirror to what we are sharing with you about ourselves, and what Satara just was very easily able to tap into. I'm going to giggle and say I'm quite sure I was a paramecium.
I was probably a paramecium too, yeah.
But, or a single cell mold spore, which, hey, we don't get to where we are today without having experienced everything on the continuum, because it's a hierarchy. We've all been mold spores. What a glorious exploration of soul self that must be. I just don't recall it, but I could imagine it. So remember, everybody, we are the Suburban Lightworker, Amber Chamberlain, and Satara Jules Lightbringer. This is Esoterics Today, and we are moving ahead with a beautiful narrative. It was time to introduce sort of our beginning to begin, and take you further into the mysteries in this particular time and expression on the cycle. And we're so happy to have you with us. We hope that you will share us. You can find our websites on the show itself on SoundCloud. We'd be happy to see you. Satara, anything you'd like to say before we close this up?
Yeah, respect parameciums.
Yeah.
We've all been a paramecium. Yeah.
Oh, a paramecium and a mushroom. All right, everybody. Much love until the next episode. Be well and take good care of yourselves. Much love.
Bye.